but he is now back to the 4, and that is 20-year-old Jeremy Sochan, Ethan. And the reason that I start with 20-year-old is because there was something that I sent you recently, and I realized it when I was looking at my fantasy team roster. And that was the fact that Jeremy Sochan, as of right now, is actually younger than the number 3 pick in last year's draft, Brandon Miller.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
and I don't know if he's older than Wemby. I think he's older than Scoot too. But that was just something when I heard that or when I saw that, that like also reminded me of just, I mean, Jeremy's youth, because that's pretty crazy to think about that he's younger than Brandon Miller, and then on top of that, he's already played a season as well. He's a sophomore.
Yeah. Do you want me to go ahead and jump right into it from
Yes,
there?
sir.
All right. So that's a really interesting point because we often forget his age. So I'm glad that you sent me that stat there. He's only 20 years old. And what was he, the ninth overall pick or the 11th?
Ninth.
Ninth overall pick. So we expect the world from a lottery pick, right? It's just natural. But when we drafted him, he was extremely raw. Like he really was just a really solid, versatile, strong defender with solid point guard skills, I guess, like as a playmaker, but really nothing else. I just use his athleticism to score easy baskets. So for Jeremy Sohan to now average 11 points per game and about 6 or 7 rebounds, 4 assists, start the season as a point guard. Um, to me, he's really had a strong season. If you really look away from the fact that he was thrust into a difficult position at point guard, made some mistakes, had some really tough moments, had some great moments too. Um, but he's been a terrific scorer for us, especially at the power forward position. He's a great cutter. He's great in open space. He's improved tremendously as a three-point shooter. What's his exact stat? 35% from three this season. That's great. I'll take that.
You
And
see
he's
the jump right there, Ethan? Sorry to interrupt you.
you're good. What was the exact jump?
We'll just look. It's right in front. Do you have it on the screen or you have a different one up?
But it's really small because I'm on a
No,
laptop.
you're good. You're good. It's 24.6%, and now he's up to 35%, and he's also taking a half a three more a game. So he's taking more threes, and his percentage has jumped up by almost 11 points or 11%.
Yeah, I mean, his free throw percentage goes from 69 to 77. Basically shooting the same from the field. But I think you can see improvements as a ball handler. I think you can see improvements in his footwork in the post. And he's gradually improved in his chemistry with Victor Wembanyama. I think they have a really nice two-man game. And there's a definite difference in his just the look of his body and his strength. If you look at him last year, he was still pretty skinny. But this year he's put on some muscle. So I've been very pleased with Jeremy Sohan's performance thus far, and things to improve on. I mean, they're kind of the same things. I mean, just continue to get better as a ball handler, continue to widen your bag in terms of being a scorer, work on consistency in the low block, and as a shooter, just continue to work on that stuff. Um, and I mean, that's pretty much it. Continue chemistry, but that's pretty much everybody, right? Chemistry.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think of Jeremy, obviously you think about the beginning of the season, of course, and I was really optimistic on that. I thought there was some potential there for sure. I think we learned as we saw the beginning of the season that that is not necessarily Jeremy's best spot. But I think with the playmaking flashes that we saw last year, as much as a bunch of people are going to disagree with this, um, I'm not mad at it. I get why they threw it out there. Let's see if we can start him. Obviously, at that point, we were still thinking that Wemby was going to play the 5, or excuse me, the 4 as well. Um, and at that point we kind of felt like we've learned that Wemby 1 can play physically with a lot of the centers. That, I mean, at the same time, Joel Embiid still did what Joel Embiid did, and that was kind of what I was thinking about going into the season, that I talked about in that Sixers post game, as well as some of kind of my concerns. But at the same time, I mean, we've seen him block Giannis, we've seen
Mhm.
him go toe to toe with AD. And not to get too much into Victor here, because I know we're about to. But that was kind of that's what we learned with the part of the with the front court, And then we also learned, obviously, with how we saw the beginning of the season go with Jeremy, that while he does have a lot of playmaking skills, and we still see him out there sometimes taking the ball up the floor with Trey Jones on the court in this starting lineup, Ethan. Now, obviously, that's usually on a fast break, where Jeremy gets the rebound and then just pushes it up the floor. But I don't think that he's as good at that, and I don't think that his playmaking, like you see, up
Mhm.
almost 2 assists here. Well, no, not 2 assists. It's like 1.2. But still, almost from 2.5 to almost 4 assists. I don't think some of that has to do with the beginning of the season and him just playing point guard, but I also think that his dribble got tighter. His vision is better. And regardless of how ugly it looked and overall for the team, whether it was a good thing or not, which we obviously realized it was a negative, whenever it came to trying to get wins and just having progression and looking competent on offense, I still think that him playing that point guard role at the beginning of the season did positive things for his career. And I know a lot of people may call that crazy and think that that's stupid, but that's just my personal opinion. We're looking at the little things here for development wise, long term. And while there were a lot of struggles in that, I think there's going to be a lot of mental fortitude that he gained from that for the rest of his career. And we still see that, from time to time, that he has his struggles there. But once again, he's 20 years old. He's younger than the number 3 pick from last year's draft, for example, right? Um, and like I said, I think there were a lot of positives that came out of that for sure. And then when it just comes to this season and the things that we've seen him do well, I think since we've made that lineup change, his offense has opened up a lot. I think a lot of that has to do with Keldon being on the bench now as well, because both of them were kind of cutting to the rim now that Champagne's in the starting lineup and there's less mouths to feed, like you mentioned. We see a lot of the things that we saw from him offensively last year. We've been seeing those since he's been moved into the starting lineup. I love his chemistry in the front court, or not necessarily chemistry. They're still working on that. But I love the front court pairing of him and Victor together moving forward defensively. The other thing that has continued to happen this year since we've taken him out of the point guard position, guess what he still does, Ethan? He still guards the primary ball handler. And while there are times where he does get got because he's 20-year-old Jeremy Sochan, there are a lot of times where you will see him force people to pass off. Um, and and really having him guard the primary ball handler in a lot of these situations is huge for us, because if we go back to Trey, which we were talking about earlier, that is one of his deficiencies, is sometimes he can just, I hate to say this, I'd get cooked too. Let me say that I get cooked a lot worse than Trey would. But sometimes Trey does just get cooked by some of these all-star guards. So having Jeremy out there and being able to slow those guys down and take the load off of Trey defensively, when it comes to guarding, really good perimeter players, that's just an example of Jeremy's versatility. And then when it comes to improvements, you know, um, even with, and we're being nitpicky here, even with the giant increase in shooting, which we love to see, you still see some some air balls here and there and stuff like that. But with the improvement that I've seen, I have no doubt in my mind that he will continue to get better at that. But just to talk about things that he can improve on, and then kind of like I hinted at a little bit earlier, with as much as I think that the point guard experiment is going to help him mentally in the long run, I think right now, as a 20-year-old, sometimes Jeremy will just get a little bit too much in his own head. And that's why, you'll see some of those games that I mentioned in some of our past recent streams, Ethan, where you just have 2 points. I think we saw another one pretty recently, in
Mhm.
either the Pelicans or the Cavs game. I can't remember exactly. And then there were some there. And I think sometimes when he gets off to a rough start, he's not able to bounce back. Like he started 0 for 5 in that most recent game where he had 2 points. Where if he starts out strong, you might see him go for 31 and 13, like he did against the Trailblazers fairly recently. But once again, really, when you think about this, Ethan, if we're gonna dumb it down, for lack of a better term, it's the inconsistency of a 20-year-old NBA player. But there's a lot of positive things that we've seen from Jeremy, especially since we've moved him in to the starting lineup.
Mm. Well said. Well said. But you know what's crazy. Last point on Jeremy. I'm looking
No,
at
go
his
ahead.
monthly stats, and I wanna look at November and then January, because November, he was ingrained as that point guard. In
Mhm.
January, we had already transitioned him over to power forward at that point. So in November, he averaged 12, 5, and 4, shooting 47% from the field, 46% from 3, 85% from the free throw line, with 2.5 turnovers a game. Now let's move him over to power forward, middle of January. He played 2 more games, keep that in mind, but averaged 13, so only 1 more point, 7 rebounds, that's about 2 more rebounds, 3 assists, 1 less assist, um, on 46% from the field, 37% from 3, so actually a worse three-point percentage, and 85% again from free throw lines. It's the same percentage from there. So statistically, he's pretty much the same player, which is a different role.
Mhm.
So everyone that was said he was a crappy player then and is now suddenly saying he's a great player now, he's the same player. It's just a positional change. So
Yeah.
that's kind
No,
of funny.
that's facts. You couldn't have said it better myself. And I remembered some other stuff I wanted to talk about before we move on, and I'll get to some comments here because we have those as well. But sometimes it's not as much. We saw it much more when he was starting. But still, sometimes he'll drive to the low block, and then he'll be on his pivot foot, and he'll just stop and like not know what to do. And
Yep.
sometimes it turns into a turnaround jumper or a nice little a pump fake and then an up and under layup or something like that. Um, but that is one thing that I continue to see um, just every once in a while. But that's another thing where I feel like a lot of this is just like IQ stuff that it's just going to take some time to get all of this down. Like when we mentioned the Thunder earlier and what they had to go through over the past 3 seasons to get to where they're at now. I think it's just going to take some time and some maturity and just being of like a legal drinking age in the United States. Like, I threw that in because I remember there was the story about him asking Pop for some wine because over in Europe and in England, I think he was already able to have some.
Yeah.
But the whole reason I bring that up is he's still 20 years old. So like some of these things, they're just going to come with youth, if that makes sense. But um, that like I said, there are all these little things that we could criticize about Jeremy, but really overall, in the grand scheme of things, he's a super solid contributor. We've been seeing his rebounding the past couple games, Ethan. Um, and the last thing that I'll mention, this is another thing that ties into Devin. Look, I mean, he only played 56 games last year. He's already at 50. It's been consistent throughout the season. I'm going to be interested at the end of the year, Ethan, to see like the full differences.
Yeah.
Um, statistically, not that that's the end all be all because the eye test matters a lot. And the other thing that's key about these stats too is this is with adding Victor. So that's the other thing you've got to keep in mind with a lot of these as well. But really, Ethan, coming into the year, probably the things that we wanted to see the most from Jeremy were improvements in his playmaking, his ball handling, and then his shooting. And I
Mhm.
think we've seen those so far.
And lastly, just to be funny,
No, go ahead.
3 plus days rest, he's averaging 17 points a game on 55% from 3.
We need all of these, Ethan, because they apply to this next game coming up. But what's the stats on Wednesdays? That's the real question.
11 points a game on 32
Mm.
3. So a rough Wednesday.
Man, all of these rest days are getting offset by the Wednesday stat.
Maybe he'll just play normal then.
Okay, getting into some of the other comments here. Nick says, "Love what Jeremy has been doing. He's expanded upon his short mid-range creation game he started to develop toward the end of last season, and obviously the low volume shooting improvement is great." General Eli says, "The only real complaint for Jeremy outside of inconsistency is I wish he would be more assertive. There's times where he differs 5 feet away from the rim on a mismatch, lol." And that's kind of what I was just alluding to with him stopping in the low block. It's like he'll run up there, like he's going to go make a play, which he does do, from time to time. But then he's like, oh, that's Walker Kessler or somebody, you know what I mean? And
Yep.
then he's like, I got to pass off. And then he's just like, kind of like looking for a pass and the rotations are a little bit off and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, he can sometimes get turnover happy when he does stuff like that.
But that has significantly decreased since moving to the 4.
for sure.
But yeah, any final thoughts on Jeremy?
No, sir. I think we covered it.